Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome back from lunch break, everyone. Hopefully you had a good break and took advantage of some of the breakout rooms and took advantage of some of the networking. A little different when we're on Zoom, but hopefully that opened up some opportunities for some people. So the afternoon session is project examples and lessons learned. This is going to operate very similar to the morning session. So from 1 o'clock to 2:40, we're going to go through the presentations. Please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. We'll do a Q&A at the end of each presentation. If there's time at the end, we'll have a further discussion and a breakout room for some additional networking. So we'll just play that by ear. Quick housekeeping reminder, please keep yourselves on mute throughout the presentation. If you want to keep your video on, that's fine. We like to see all of your smiling faces. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So our first presenter is Dave Bastian. He's with Canyon Country Youth Corps, and his presentation is called Fieldwork in the Time of COVID.
Hello and welcome. My name is Dave Bastian, and I'm the Partnership Director for the Canyon Country Youth Corps, also known as CCYC. CCYC is the stewardship program of the Canyon Country Discovery Center located in Monticello, Utah. I'm here today to talk to you about two things. The first is the way our programs pivoted at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic from conservation projects to service that was truly outside of anything we've ever done before. The second is the efforts that national and local Conservation Corps programs put into developing protocols to deal with the situation we're in while in the field. I'm not going to go into a great deal of info on those protocols specifically, but a few of us will be here to answer questions after this presentation, and we would be happy to share those protocols with you if you are interested. So to start, we need to take ourselves back to March of 2020. Remember, if you can, this slightly more innocent, slightly more idyllic time. We visited with friends, we ate in restaurants, and we didn't wear masks to do a grocery store run. It was at this time that 6 fresh-faced AmeriCorps members arrived at the Discovery Center to begin their crew leader development program. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Conservation Corps programs, let me give you a quick intro. We take young people from our communities and all over the country, and we train them on the skills they need to tackle conservation projects on public lands all over the United States. Skills like wilderness medicine, chainsaw safety, herbicide application, and trail building. Then we run field seasons where we remove woody invasives from southwestern rivers for the BLM, map weeds for the National Park Service, and tackle fuel reduction projects for state foresters, to name a few. In the case of our program, the Canyon Country Youth Corps, we operate from here, the Canyon Country Discovery Center, which I think you can agree is a beautiful, beautiful building, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And while most of our members come from San Juan County and the Navajo Nation, many of our crew leaders do come from all over the United States. And in March, right as they began to arrive here in Monticello at the Discovery Center, lockdowns began to occur. Now, it's hard to remember this, it's hard to imagine this next part, participating as we all are in a virtual conference rather than in person nearly a year later. But we convened an emergency meeting with our staff and made the decision to keep these new crew leaders in the field because we thought at the time this whole thing was just going to blow over in a few weeks, maybe a month. Many of our members were also coming from areas that were really being ravaged by the virus. And our reasoning was, as long as we could keep them busy, we could keep them paid, thanks to our AmeriCorps grant and the support of our state commission, You Serve Utah. It wasn't very far into training when we realized this thing was not just going to blow over. And it wasn't long after that, our partners started to inform us that we wouldn't be returning to work on public lands at that point, It just was not going to be possible. We began to realize that keeping our members busy wasn't going to look anything like it usually does. We had to look for alternatives to our typical conservation work. We had young people with training and skills, plus, most importantly, a strong commitment to service. And they were eager to help their community in any way they could. We began to reach out to partners in areas beyond public lands work, and we found the right fit in the Bluff Area Mutual Aid, known mostly by its volunteers and supporters as BAMA. BAMA was a community-led effort to get food and necessary supplies to the citizens of San Juan County, Utah, especially those in the chapters of the Navajo Nation located within our county. BAMA was truly and is truly a community effort in San Juan County. It's made up and steered by residents of the Bluff area, nonprofits that serve the area, such as the Rural Utah Project and Utah Dene Bakea, and businesses such as Twin Rocks Trading Post. Twin Rocks was at that time closed due to the pandemic and served as the staging area for the efforts. There, our members and other BAMA volunteers packed boxes for individuals and families for half the week, and then our members delivered those supplies to the individuals and families the other half. From the packing to the deliveries, all of this was done in a socially distant manner to reduce contact, and all volunteers and participants were masked up. Also should add, the food was delivered to doorsteps, knocked, and then the participants moved back so the families could come gather their food. It was contactless there as well. When we first brought up the BAMA project and this shift in direction to our members, not a single one of them declined to participate. Keep in mind, this was still really early in the pandemic. We weren't used to living with COVID in any way. We weren't even totally sure how contagious or dangerous it all was. There were still so many unknowns. When asked about his experience with this project, one member said, "I'll be honest. When I found out that instead of using power tools and living out in the wild, I'd be packing and delivering supplies, I was a little disheartened. But after one day doing this work, it quickly went away. At the end of each workday with BAMA, I know my work will directly and greatly help families who have nowhere else to turn amid this crisis." Another added, "It hasn't been what we expected, but I think that it's a tremendous way to learn about your neighbors by meeting them in the least pleasant of circumstances. I think we're seeing not just what is sad or what is missing, but the resilience in the community." And a third set of the experience, it's been a little bit reminiscent of back home, just a bit, because the sense of community is similar to what I've seen in coal mining towns that I've lived around or near. And I just think this whole event is really bringing to light the way that poverty leads people to kind of lean on each other a bit more. But then if we're supposed to be socially isolated, where does that leave people in need? San Juan County, where we operate, is a very remote place. The population density is roughly 1.9 people per square mile. It also has the lowest per capita income in Utah and is among the lowest per capita income in the United States. It is a majority indigenous population, but many resources are concentrated in the two largest cities, Monticello and Blanding. For many residents, a trip to the store is measured in hours, not minutes. Early in the pandemic, our county had some of the highest positive cases in the United States. The need was certainly there, and our members were able to help the community meet those needs. During our time with BAMA, we were able to deliver 1,000 boxes to 2,000 individuals, and we drove 1,300 miles to some incredibly remote and beautiful locations. Now, the core world, as we call it, is a pretty special place. While our crew leaders were gearing up to aid the BAMA project, another program, the Northwest Youth Corps, had the capacity and tools to begin to look seriously at the issue of safely returning to public lands work in the midst of all this. They knew, as Jay Satz, their Director of Partnerships and Innovation, told me, things were going to be dicey. Utilizing tools such as physician and legal advisors, tools smaller programs like mine don't have access to, they were able to draft initial protocols for youth corps to use to get back in the field. They then made the decision to lift all boats. And through the Corps Network and the Public Land Service Coalition, two umbrellas that serve all corps in the country, NYC released these protocols to everyone. Our partner programs here in Utah, the Utah Conservation Corps at Utah State University, and the Intergovernmental Internship Cooperative at Southern Utah University, took those NYC protocols and adapted them to serve their needs. UCC and IIC worked closely with their respective universities, and these protocols were inspected and approved by risk management offices and student affairs staff. This collaboration and multiple levels of approval ensured increased scrutiny of protocols and operations. Program staff then went to great lengths to ensure these expectations and protocols were exhaustively communicated to current and incoming Corps members. This included regular updates from directors to all members, emails and phone calls from recruitment staff, and regular risk briefings from field staff. I've long loved this aspect of the Corps world, that we create and share, collaborate, and partner. But it has never been more on display than it has been during these times, during this COVID pandemic. The larger programs with the resources were able to craft policies and protocols and then shared them with the smaller programs like the one I work for. And they did it without hesitation. In fact, as Jay told me, that was the plan from the very beginning when they sat down to craft these protocols. We used these protocols during our time with BAMA and continued to use them as BAMA transitioned to a new phase and we moved back to conservation work on public lands. As the weather warmed and agencies became more comfortable with allowing us to work, we once again picked up tools. But we worked with masks. The stretch circles had a lot more space in them. We worked in smaller groups. We interacted with our partners via Zoom rather than face-to-face. And we washed our hands like we never have before. And we were already pretty big on hand washing. It was a wild year, but we still got the river restoration miles in, the thousands of feet of fence built, and the many miles of trail constructed. And we did it without a single positive case of COVID. It wasn't just our very small program that succeeded either. NYC, who as we know originated these protocols, had only a few positive cases out of over 550 members. And most of these were interns serving in an office environment, not on field crews. UCC, the largest program in the state of Utah, only had one positive case out of 30 members. And numbers like these keep repeating in every program I've spoken to. The 2020 field season showed that conservation corps can get out and do what we do best. Our staff focused on spreading calm throughout the year. There were many unknowns of operating field crews, especially in remote and high elevation locations, but we effectively collaborated with peers from other corps to gain and share best practices, and we were able to reassure both our members and our project partners that we could safely conduct field work. Now we are looking at another field season dealing with this pandemic, but we have the knowledge and skills we've gained. We have the lessons we learned. There's no doubt in my mind that we can safely and effectively conduct conservation work in the time of COVID. So that was a small snapshot of how we dealt with in this time. We have a few of us here who were instrumental in the formation of our protocols, so we can answer questions. And again, we'd be happy to share those protocols with you if you'd like. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
That was a pretty amazing story, resiliency and being flexible. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I think just as a reminder with the protocols, Dave, do you want to put your email in the chat box in case people want to get those? Do you want to email those directly?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And while you're doing that, I do have one question for you. You kind of went into this, but I'm just curious on the time frame for when those protocols actually got sent out to you. It seemed like it was very quick. And if you could just give us an idea on how what the time frame was for that.
Yeah, that's a good question. NYC really started to work on those right away, as a group. And actually, I do have one colleague on right now, Jake Delorier. So maybe he can chime in too at some point on sort of, he's with the Utah Conservation Corps, on his perspective of this. But I think that at least when Colorado and Utah started shutting down, we had meetings the very next day, and NYC was already kind of talking, because they had the resources, because they're such a big program. They were already talking about drafting protocols, even though for all of us, the field season was at this point months away. So, it was, I think before we actually even started with BAMA, we had drafts of those things. And like I said, for us, the smallest program in the state, we got a lot of help from USU, which is where Utah Conservation Corps is located. So, they had gone through those, but again, before we even went to the first day of the BAMA work, we had those things in hand. So any thoughts there, Jake?
Yeah, no, I think, it was a great starting point. It was, both of our programs were a little bit limited because we already onboarded and brought on our AmeriCorps service members. So within the state of Utah, it didn't make a lot of sense releasing them back into the general population. And then within Utah, we handled the pandemic a little differently than Colorado, but we had county by county closures, and that helped us kind of figure out how to work within that landscape, while that was a persistent issue.
It was a testament to Conservation Corps' resiliency that they started working on this right away. So that was proud to be a part of that, and a small part, but a part.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, especially speaking from RiversEdge West perspective. We secure a lot of grant funding to support the Conservation Corps, and the fact that you guys were still out there getting the work done was pretty remarkable. So we do have one question that came in. Are the protocols being revised and updated as the pandemic progresses?
Yeah, we were updating them constantly. And still are. As we found that, that didn't seem like this virus was living on surfaces quite as much, we put more emphasis on masking and slightly less emphasis on cleaning vehicles. We're a residential program, so our members live together. So that does change things a little bit. They all go back to the same place at the end of the day. We were very emphatic about cleaning, but we did become more emphatic about, like I said, things like mask wearing, about gathering with members, about distances in the field when we were with partners in the field. Another thing that's kind of interesting, not really related to the question, but sort of, is that we saw a lot less like GI issues and just regular illness issues this season than ever before in the 12 years I've been in this world. I don't know if you saw that as well, Jake, but hand washing and just paying attention to your health pays off.
The running joke was, for a population of people that work with their hands, everybody had really clean fingernails.
Yeah,
which was a first.
Yeah, very true.
Silver lining of all this, right?
Silver lining, yeah.
And being able to adapt is one of those things. Our protocols, we just revised them a month ago, and they're sitting there with risk management. But we responded to a disaster deployment in Florida right after Thanksgiving, and having to adapt to those sort of situations, because unfortunately the pandemic doesn't really concern itself with disaster responses and some things that are just necessities.
Yeah, that's great. One more question before we move on to the next presentation. Actually, we have another question that came in. I'll read that one first. Did you all have any cases in your crew? How did you all handle that with living situations?
So we did not have a single actual positive case. We did have one scare, somebody who was showing symptoms. And so, like I said, I'm happy to share the protocols, but they did determine that. So if there were, any symptoms, that person was ideally to be pulled out of the field and returned back to base camp, where they would be quarantined until they got a test. The one scare we had, again, they didn't have ended up with a negative test. Unfortunately, it occurred so late in the season, that person, by that point, it was, we were done with the season, so they just went home. We also, I don't know how much time we have. We also have Matt Jennings with the Western Colorado Conservation Corps on as well. Maybe he could chime in about what they had with their program, in addition to Jake. But
hey guys, honestly, pretty similar situations in Western Colorado as it sounds like it was in Utah. I know it affected some of the other corps a lot more than us, but I'm happy to talk about that more if anybody's interested.
Great, thanks, Matt. If you if anyone wants to directly message Matt or keep an eye open in the chat box for any questions that come in, I think we will end the presentation. I do want to leave us with one comment that came in from Cynthia. Really inspiring work. Thanks for sharing. So Dave, thank you for the presentation, and Jake and Matt, thank you for chiming in. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Our next presentation is from Cassandra Schenk from ERO Resources Corporation, and her presentation title is Wet Meadow Restoration in Gunnison Sage Grouse Habitat along the Gould Reservoir.
Welcome to our talk. This is Cassandra Schenk. I am an environmental scientist with ERO Resources Corporation, and together with Jake Harder, we're going to present to you today about a wet meadow restoration project we've been working on for a couple years. The Wet Meadow Restoration Project is being undertaken by the Fruitland Irrigation Company on land owned by the company. The purpose of the project is to replace habitat. The company received a federal grant through the Bureau of Reclamation, and as part of the funding decision, they were instructed to replace the habitat that would be lost from lining the ditch. And so we worked with them to help out. We found some riparian habitat here on property that they owned. This is the Gould Reservoir that actually feeds the canal. And there's a pasture here. This, just to orientate you, we're in Delta County, well, on the border actually of Montrose and Delta County in Western Colorado. And we're about 7 miles south of the town of Crawford, the little town of Crawford. And Fruitland Mesa is off this map, but it's to the northwest, and the canal irrigates pasture on Fruitland Mesa. So that gives you some idea of where we're at. So Cattleman's Ditch irrigates the field to the north of this road. There's a little road here, which you can see on the zoomed in aerial. And this pasture, actually this direction is down gradient, of course, and this pasture funnels tailwater through these culverts onto the company's own pasture, which they lease out for grazing. And so when we went out to visit the site, we could see that there were some swales, and we mapped them where the water had eroded. And some of the erosional features are very steep and incised, and we decided not to try to tackle them. Instead, we focused in on this, what we called the Center Gulch. So that will be the area that we're going to focus in on today. So you can see the issues here. This is facing north or down gradient. You can see the Gould Reservoir here in the distance and the erosion that's been occurring here. You can't really tell from this picture, but it gets suddenly so deep with some severe head cutting that it would be way over our heads to work in there. So the goal of our plan was to build several small rock structures, or Z-dike structures, in the drainage pattern to control erosion and restore healthy soil conditions. We also wanted to establish new riparian shrub plantings adjacent to the Z-dike structure. The area is within unoccupied sage grouse habitat. So the resources that we brought to the table were, first of all, a manual that one of my colleagues had. She gave us this idea. And then quickly we we enlisted the help of Dr. Tom Grant and also Nathan Seward, both experienced practitioners with these structures. To get ready to put these in, we were able to do several on-sites with Nathan and Tom, and they helped us really narrow down where we wanted to put the structures and how many. So that enabled us to identify the quantities that we needed and to go ahead and purchase that angular rock, the stone that we needed for the structures, and also logs. So we did hire a contractor to come and stage the rocks at certain sites that were flagged. You saw in the previous photograph. We also organized a workshop, including federal agencies, to help us with hands-on learning so that we had enough people out there to put these in place. One of the things we did get was a permit with the Corps of Engineers, and they have a nationwide permit 27 for projects like this. It was a pretty quick and easy process to get the permit in place. They were, pleased to be able to permit it. And it is because of in the state of Colorado, irrigation ditches are considered jurisdictional, and we were planning to fill in below the ordinary high water mark. Okay, so our first workshop was on September 19th, 2019, and we had a really good turnout of volunteers to assist Fruitland Irrigation Company and contractors, myself and Jake. It lasted about 8 hours, and we got participation from the Western Slope Conservation Center, which Jake Harder is the watershed coordinator, and he'll be talking here in a minute. We also had a biologist from the Bureau of Land Management, a biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because of the interest in the sage grouse habitat, and a biologist from the Bureau of Reclamation, and people from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, as well as some volunteers from the community. So we completed a log structure and about 3 Z-dike one-rock dams during that time. And then we had a follow-up workshop to finish the project. So with that, here's the technical notes. This is an excellent resource for anyone interested in these structures, and this is what we used. And Jake is going to talk next about how we implemented these structures. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jake.
Great. Thanks, Cass. Yeah, and that manual that Cass just referenced was really useful, very informative for what I'm going to talk about here, about where to place the structures and how to install them.
Okay.
Let's get into the next slide, Cass.
Yep. So.
Okay. Yeah, so this is our, thanks for zooming that in. This is our desired conditions. Cass is referencing the drainage that goes down to the reservoir. The water is moving from the bottom of the picture up to the top of the picture, and that's heading north. So the red triangles you see in the drainage there are one-rock dams. I'll talk about those in a minute. And then the green triangles are a log and fabric structure. They're a little bigger. And the reason for that is that there's a pretty significant head cut as you went further down the drainage. So I'll get into the one-rock dams first and kind of how those are put together. This is our first workshop in September. And you can see this one-rock dam is really one rock high. That's kind of where the name comes from. And this one's about 50% complete already. You can see as far as constructing these, there's not a lot of disturbance to the ground. So the only excavation that really needs to occur is in the first sill stones or foundational stones that are right in front of the structure here. Those are pretty large flat rocks dug in so that they are flush with the grade. And they are your foundation. And then on top of those are some larger rocks. This is kind of a close-up of them. This is my little dog Juniper showing them off. So these larger rocks sit on top of the sill stones, and they create the first one rock height. And then maybe, Cass, if you could go back to that last slide in front there, and then you can see behind, you start filling in the rest of the structure behind those larger rocks. The water is moving from the left of the picture to the right of the picture. So what we're trying to do is create a high structure in the downstream side of the structure so that it backs water up as it's flowing over it. Okay, now I think you can go ahead and show the finished. Let's see, go one more. Okay, so this is the finished structure. All of these rocks are hand placed, and the reason for that is that they interlock with each other. And so one of the maybe most difficult parts of building this is finding the appropriate rock size and shape to fit together. But really, when you're going to look for this rock or purchase rock or stage it for your structures, you'll want, for your larger rocks, you'll want some in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 inches in diameter for your larger rocks. And then some other rocks, angular in shape, that are from the neighborhood of 4 to 6 inches, because they'll fill in and interlock in the little spaces. And it is kind of an art form when you're putting it together, because you're interlocking these rocks. They don't move. Okay, I'm going to keep moving to the next structure we put down gradient was a log and fabric structure. It's much bigger. This is a picture I found from the Z-Dike manual of a finished structure. It's made for big head cuts. You can see here, you excavate the head cut out into like a squared off cavity, and then I'll talk about how to put this together. Here's our nearly finished. That is our finished product looking upstream. This is a good picture to start with. So this head cut was about 3 foot deep, and we used a backhoe to shape the banks, and then we laid fabric down first into the newly excavated pit, so to speak. And then we put T-posts in along the sides, you can see on the left-hand side of that picture. And then as we started laying logs down, we start wiring them together. All of this is explained in the manual really clearly, but this just kind of gives you a visual. Let's see. Here's a great video of how that works. So there's a crew of, I'm not sure how many folks are standing in that picture, but it's quite a big project, and it took us all of about 6 hours to try to put this all together. And you can see how the fabric is laid up and over the sides here and held into the T-posts. This fabric is like a heavy felt fabric. I think in the future we would probably go with something that is eventually going to break down into the soil, maybe a coconut fiber or something to that effect. The way these are designed is that over time they will fill in, and the head cut will smooth out and create a smooth gradient. The vegetation will fill in, and eventually this kind of goes away into the landscape. The fabric, however, we use, not likely. So in the future, I think we'd use something else. Logs are, the bottom logs were, I think, 10 feet in length, and then we stepped them up to, I believe, 8 foot, 6 foot, and then 4 foot for the top row, wiring the layers in as we went. Here's kind of a finished look of our project looking up the drainage, which is towards the south here. You can see some one rock dams. They're really, they're not obtrusive to the landscape, and they're made to be that way so that they disappear over time. there's not much maintenance with these other than to maybe add a rock, another layer of rock, if that's needed in the future. Key is to, create as minimal impact as possible and reduce the erosion that's going on in the drainage.
So yeah, just to bring it home with the big picture, the reason we were excited about presenting at this conference and choosing these structures is there's really some innovative things about them. Not only are they aesthetically pleasing to look at and they blend in with the natural landscape, they also imitate nature, and they allow these rocks to capture the velocity of the water instead of the soil and spread it laterally, increasing the opportunity for vegetation to take hold. You can see some of this shrub layer in here, some of the sedge and vegetation, the wetland vegetation, we expect to come back and to broaden, almost like a beaver dam analog too, like a meadow, taking a meadow and just making it more productive, more moist and more productive. Another thing that's interesting, and Jake can speak to this, is that the rocks themselves act as a source of moisture during hot summer days. They had cooled overnight, so they remain cooler, and then they actually condense water and create more moisture, which creates a positive feedback loop with the plants. So as more vegetation grows, there's more moisture available and more growth occurs. There's more shading, more transpiration, and it's just like a really neat way to assist in the recovery of a riparian area. Okay, I think we're going to move back to the presentation. Thank you so much, Jake, for speaking with us. And we kind of had a multimedia thing going on here. So I'm going to click back to our normal presentation. So just in summary, we had log construction and one rock dam construction. I won't read through this slide, but you can see some of the high points of what we were able to do at this site. We did have to come back and follow up a little over a year later to complete our goals. This is the picture that you had already seen previously. So we're real excited to track the progress over time. So just to summarize the level of effort for anyone interested in doing this, I put this table together so you could see it took about 5 months to plan it, juggling other jobs and other work. It could probably be planned in a quicker time frame. And then just the level of effort to create these structures, it did take quite a few man hours and some rock and materials. We did need to get that 404 permit. So with that, we're going to conclude our talk, and we really thank you for tuning in. Please don't hesitate to contact us. Again, I'm with ERO Resources, and Jake's with the Western Slope Conservation Center. We also want to give a big shout out to Nate and Tom, who helped us. We couldn't have done this project without their support, and the variety of people that came and supported this all along as well, including Bill Zedike, wherever he is. We really thank him for his vision in putting this handbook together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra and Jake. That was a great example of a collaborative project working with a lot of different partners. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We have maybe time for one or two. I'm not seeing any right now, so I will ask at least one question. Jake, I think you mentioned using different fabric in the future. I don't know if Jake is here or Cassandra can just answer. Any other changes that you would do differently if you did this over again?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, this is Cassandra. Unfortunately, Jake is out in the field today, so I think now that we know more of what we're getting into, we could definitely shorten the planning time and get out there and do these things a little more easily. We're just pretty pleased actually with the response of those initial plantings that we did in 2019. They look really good. I guess, oh yes, there is one thing for sure. We got a little bit lazy and used heavy equipment to remove the sod for that sill layer. And although it might have seemed like a good idea at the time, we were kind of convinced by the farmers to do it. We over excavated. And I think it's really easy to do that. And you don't want to do that. So I think just having a very tender hand with removing vegetation right where you're going to put that sill layer, that base layer on those one rock dams. That's what I would recommend. And we could do it with a shovel. We should have probably done it with a shovel and not with a backhoe. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And just a reminder, the ZDEC manual link that was in the presentation, I don't know if we can add that to the chat box. If not, we will send out the link for the recorded.
The chat is disabled, so no one can type questions in.
Oh, okay. We will get that fixed.
And I'll email to Kara the link to the ZDEC manual.
Perfect. And then we will also have the link for the recording for the presentation, so then people can go back and look at it and get it that way as well. So apologies that the chat box was disabled. So we are out of time. If anyone does have any other questions, Cassandra, if you can just keep an eye on the chat box, and then we'll make sure to put you in touch with anyone else if there are any other questions that come in.
You bet. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, up next we have Elaine Nichols with Friends of the Verde River. Her presentation title is Oasis in the Desert, a showcase of collaborative restoration along wild and scenic Fossil Creek in Arizona.
Hello, my name is Elaine Nichols. I'm the Habitat Restoration Program Coordinator for Friends of the Verde River. Friends is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to work collaboratively for a healthy, flowing Verde River system. We focus our work on restoring habitat, sustaining river flows, and building supportive communities. We engage in a combination of boots-on-the-ground projects and policy solutions guided by sound conservation principles with the goal of meeting human and environmental needs, all in an outcomes-oriented manner. Friends of the Verde River convenes the multi-stakeholder group Verde Watershed Restoration Coalition, also known as VWORK. Today I'll be showcasing the partnership's effort for restoration along Fossil Creek, which is one of the two wild and scenic rivers in Arizona. Fossil Creek's crystal clear blue waters run through central Arizona as a tributary of the Verde River. In the early 1900s, these waters were used to generate power for mining communities in the area. In 1984, Fossil Springs Wilderness was designated, and by 2005, these dams were previously used to generate power were decommissioned. After this, the flow of the creek went from 4 CFS to 40 CFS. In 2009, Fossil Creek received its Wild and Scenic designation, making it one of the two only wild and scenic rivers in the state of Arizona. 16.8 total miles of Fossil Creek are designated. 7.5 miles are in the middle, and they make up the recreation segment, and the upper and lower Fossil make up 9.3 miles of the wild segments. Visitation at Fossil Creek has increased greatly. Fossil Creek has become an international destination for recreation. Along with the recreational value, Fossil has 5 other outstanding remarkable values listed in its Wild and Scenic designation. The geological value of Fossil is evident when you walk through and see the large travertine system. This travertine system is the 4th largest in North America. Fossil Creek is outstandingly remarkable for its purely native fishery and wildlife habitat. Fossil is the only intact perennial stream without diversions in Arizona. Fossil also has a traditional use value It's meaningful and sacred to multiple indigenous tribes, including the Yavapai and Apache people. And lastly, water resources are a value for Fossil Creek. Fossil Springs discharge almost 1 million gallons per hour of spring water. The history of both the wilderness and wild and scenic designations in Fossil Creek would not be possible without the collaborative efforts of community members, forest specialists, NGOs, and more interested parties. And this collaborative effort continues through its management today. This slide shows 2 of the collaborative efforts for Fossil Creek. Through the Verde Front, a regional collaborative working towards stewardship of natural resources in the Verde Valley, the Fossil Creek Working Group brings together citizens, organizations, agencies, tribes, and local governments to collaborate and participate in discussions surrounding NEPA and the Comprehensive River Management Plan. Areas of focus and dialogue include protection of Fossil Creek's values, interim management, adaptive management, and monitoring, and capacity building for future efforts in Fossil Creek. VWork, which will be the main focus collaborative for this presentation, is a multi-stakeholder group made of federal, tribal, and state agencies, private landowners, corporations, and nonprofit organizations, all working together on a watershed-scale initiative to manage invasive plants, protect wildlife corridors, reduce accelerated erosion, protect water quality, and build stewardship within the Verde watershed. Fossil Creek has been a focus of this group since 2013, when the first contracted on-the-ground work began in the Fossil Creek area. As a collaborative effort through VWork, Friends of the Verde River has contracted Arizona Conservation Corps crews of young adults to conduct several years of invasive species treatments in Fossil Creek, most recently in 2019. This work was focused on Middle Fossil, which is the recreation area. The species of focus are giant reed, tamarisk, tree of heaven, Russian olive, and Himalayan blackberry. Early career botanists, overseen by Friends, also monitor the riparian areas to measure plant community composition and native plant growth. In a combined effort to reduce erosion and control recreation impacts, VWork has worked to install signs, construct hardened trails, and close social trails at many recreation sites throughout Fossil Creek. VWork partners have also completed seeding projects and road closure projects. Most recently, with support from the National Forest Foundation and Arizona Water Protection Fund, VWork has expanded restoration efforts to Upper Fossil and Lower Fossil. These areas are far more remote and partially in designated wilderness, so planning and coordination of this work comes with more challenges. This past winter, we were able to contract an AZCC crew to map and monitor a portion of Lower Fossil, and we plan to complete the rest of Lower Fossil mapping and monitoring this upcoming spring. Concurrently, we are working with the Forest Service personnel to complete the minimum requirements decision guide to evaluate actions in the wilderness area. In this case, the use of herbicide to treat invasive plants. We are hopeful to start invasive treatment on Lower Fossil next fall into winter. VWork crews will be monitoring and mapping Himalayan blackberry in the Fossil Springs area this spring. Himalayan blackberry has established itself throughout the riparian corridor and is especially growing over the springs. This overgrowth is a major problem for the sensitive fossil spring snail that live in the springs. This overgrowth changes the environment in the springs, and the snails are less able to survive this change. We will be establishing a treatment test plot outside of the wilderness boundary and outside of Fossil Springs snail habitat. We'll be testing out this method and will measure the efficacy of it and use our findings to plan for future treatment efforts. Throughout this project, we've had some challenges and we've learned lessons along the way. We'd like to share some of these so we can apply them to other projects. Firstly, when working on restoration in a high-use recreation area, because most of the public focus for Fossil included recreation issues, we realized that it's important to identify these recreation impacts and how they can be combined with restoration initiatives. The trail hardening and closures are a perfect example of this. Social trails were a major problem throughout Fossil, and constructing rock steps on main trails and closing social trails both helped manage the crowds and also reduced erosion. Another lesson we learned was proper timing for restoration activities. As with most field work, timing is everything. Because Fossil is such a high-use area, it's very important that this effort is coordinated to not overlap with the busy recreation season. To avoid crowds, contracted Arizona Conservation Corps crews treated between the months of October and March, which is fortunately also the dormant season and has been our most successful time to treat our species. November and December seem to be our most successful treatment times to avoid crowd, treat plants in dormancy, and try to avoid winter rains. Restoration in the remote wilderness areas of Fossil has its own set of challenges. When we proposed this project, we didn't take into consideration the extra planning and approval that is needed when working within designated wilderness. When the project got underway and we realized this time commitment, we were fortunate that both NFF and Arizona Water Protection Fund were understanding of this challenge and allowed timeline changes that we needed to make this work possible. We plan to write extra planning time in wilderness proposals in the future. The remote nature of Lower Fossil has also created a challenge for our planning efforts. Typically, we write a proposal after seeing the state of the riparian area, but due to the difficult access in this area, we hadn't scouted it before securing funding. I don't recommend this. However, we wrote in our proposal that we would be monitoring and surveying the area before we treated it to determine the status and restoration needs. It can take multiple days to get to parts of the riparian area, and by writing our proposal in this way, we can ensure that we have funding for scouting and monitoring. In conclusion, I would like to thank the project sponsors, Arizona Water Protection Fund, National Forest Foundation, and the Coconino National Forest. Folks in these organizations have been great partners throughout this project. Special thank you to Danielle Boulay, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinator at the Red Rock Ranger District, for sharing information for this presentation and her commitment to protecting Fossil Creek. Also, a big thanks to Arizona Conservation Corps, staff, and Corps members for their continued partnership in getting stuff done on the ground. It's so meaningful to engage young adults in this restoration, and as someone who worked in Conservation Corps, I'm always elated to work with the Corps members and see them doing meaningful work in the field. And thank you everyone watching for taking the time to learn about our collaborative work in Fossil Creek, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thanks again.
Thanks, Elaine. That was a great presentation. Okay, real quick. So if you are still having issues putting questions in the chat box, you can just verbally say your questions. Apologies for that. It looks like it is working now. And it looks like there were a few that came in after Cassandra's presentation that Cassandra has taken care of. So I wanted to turn that real quick. Unless we have any other questions come in, Elaine, I do have one for you. Can you talk about the Himalayan blackberry a little bit with the plans for treatment? It looked like in one of those pictures the access was incredibly difficult, and how you guys are going to tackle that.
Yeah, so what we're going to do this spring is a smaller size plot, and we are looking at doing a treatment where we cut it back and then we wait a few weeks and then spray it, and then we're going to go in again in the fall and spray it again. And I'm hoping to get like some area nearby the blackberry that we can only spray one time to kind of compare the two and see how effective the treatment is. But for that picture in that area near the springs, it's just an added difficulty to treat blackberry that close to the water. What we're doing won't be next to the springs. It'll be in the area so we can look at the climate and have the same factors there, but we have a lot more work to do for figuring out how to get those really large stands right next to the water. And if anyone has any suggestions, please reach out to me.
If you want to put your email in the chat box too, that'd be good.
Sure.
You had a really good suggestion for lessons learned as far as flexibility and funding proposals, especially in unsurveyed areas. And just curious how that has been going for you with different funders. Have most of the funding opportunities allowed you to be flexible?
Yeah. The way we've written it in our proposals is that, we need, a lot of our sites are pretty accessible, so we can get a good estimate for how long treatment will take just by going out and walking the property. But when we do have the remote ones, the funders have been pretty understanding of the fact that we can't really tell them, or sometimes some projects we've gotten like funding to figure it out, and then like a phased funding type of thing. So, but we've had some good funders that understand that is a challenge and is something that takes money to figure out. So that's good.
Sure. Great. One more question for you. The recreation, I was curious, I think a lot of areas have seen increased recreation use and overusage, especially with COVID. Were a lot of the remedies that you guys did prior to COVID, in response to COVID, or can you give us an idea for that? And if you're still dealing with some issues there?
Yeah, so we did lower fossil in 2020, which is really a remote area where there's not a lot of recreation. So we're going to come up now this spring on seeing the COVID recreation levels. Fossil is permitted from April to October, so it shouldn't be higher than the permit allows. So that's good. But yeah, we haven't really dealt with that yet. I'm interested to see how it will go. I know usage did go up even after permit season this winter down there. So
yeah, it's definitely become an issue for a lot of places, I think. So
yeah.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you very much for your presentation and taking the time to be with us, Elaine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, up next we have Eric McCulley with River Restoration. The presentation is titled Restoration of Longitudinal Connectivity of the Price River for the Benefit of Native Fish Species and People.
Hello, my name is Eric McCulley. I'm with River Restoration out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and today I'm going to talk to you about improving the climate resilience for bluehead sucker by improving fish passage on the Price River through Helper, Utah. I'd like to thank all of our stakeholders and participants in this project, including Helper City, who is spearheading the project since 2013, the National Park Service, RTCA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Partners for Fish and Wildlife, Trout Unlimited, the Department of Natural Resources for Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative, Carbon County, and the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation. We couldn't do it without this group, so I appreciate all the support and help we've had over the years. A little background on Helper. You can see the map here. Grand Junction is over to the right, and Provo, Utah, and Utah Lake are over to the left. So Helper's about halfway in between Salt Lake City and Grand Junction. Carbon County has about 2,200 people, so it's a sparsely populated rural county. And the project is mostly at the mouth of the Price Canyon. The main history of Helper is it was a railroad hub, and Helper actually denotes the trains that help push the coal up over the mountain to get over to the other side. The Price River is about 495 square mile drainage basin. And the most notable feature up high is on the star, which is the Schofield Reservoir. And it's about 65,000 acre feet of active capacity. The total length of the river is 130 miles, and it's been very affected by diversions and other alterations to the river. But the river can be very flashy, and thunderstorms can come through and really affect the hydrology, and that's one of the challenges that we have. So the main focus of the project has been improving habitat for fish. This is a list of native game fish, non-native game fish, and non-game fish that are found within the Price River. There's also bluehead sucker and long-nosed dace found in the Price River through Helper. And the main focus of our projects have been to improve passage for bluehead sucker. The suckers are not a jumping fish. They swim around on the bottom, and they can swim up to about 5 feet per second. So we have to work on how we can help the fish swim through. So real briefly, I want to just let folks know, why this might be important to your projects. And I think one of the main reasons is that we do have many obsolete diversions and infrastructure throughout watersheds across the United States and around the world for that matter. There's tens of thousands of small dams that were built up to 100 years ago. And they're in a condition now where they either need to be maintained or they need to be taken out. And there's a lot of momentum now in removing these. In addition to providing for connectivity for fish, native fish, and also sport fish, you can also improve riparian areas. As you do this work, you go in and you create some disturbance, but you are able to improve the riparian areas, and you can also get the communities involved. So that's the main focus of this. You can also bring together lots of different funding sources, from water quality to habitat to aquatic and riparian habitat improvements, and then also improvements for society and outdoor recreation. So in order to develop a project like this, we first try to look at the opportunities. So in 2013, a river restoration plan was created for the town of Helper. It's about 2 miles through town, and there were about 7 or 8 main focal locations, but there are really 6 barriers for fish passage, and that's been the main focus. There are other opportunities in the future. So the opportunities we had were to provide fish passage, remove navigation hazards, increase fish habitat, do riparian restoration, and do community education. There's also constraints on the project, and we try not to start with the constraints because it makes it really hard to get out of the starting gate if you think about all the difficulties you have ahead. But at this time, we're actually at phase 6 of 6. And so we've completed 5 phases. And it all started with a beginning pilot project that I'll show you some pictures of. But the challenges are, funding, where are we going to get funding for this? The hydrology is very challenging in this situation. We had a storm upstream a couple years ago, and it was running about 50 CFS, and we estimated that it potentially went up to 9,000 CFS in half an hour or an hour from over a 2-inch rainstorm in 15 minutes up canyon. So that's kind of a hard situation to plan for. And it did create some damage. But for the most part, we got past that and we learned from it. Private property is another consideration. A lot of times folks just don't want you working on their property. But the way we got around that was we actually, developed this beach at Helper and with the pilot project, and then people started to see the benefits. And then folks started actually asking the city of Helper, hey, can you help us out with our part of the river? Because the river has become a real central point especially with the the loss of coal income and things like that in this rural area. There's also disconnected floodplains. Flood conveyance is difficult. Some of the bridges are undersized, and there's a really high debris and sediment load. So those are some of the challenges that we've had to get past. So our design philosophy is to look at every river as unique, and it's a different place. So we look at the users, both from the aquatic species and the natural systems, to ditch owners and irrigators. One of the projects we had was an active ditch that is still in use, so we had to work around that. And then there's also recreational boaters and folks like that. You also have to consider the timing of these projects with irrigation system, fish migration, and high recreation periods. And then we really try to look at the river function, the stability of the reach, the flood conveyance, and the woody debris and ice and how those affect things. And then the environmental circumstances with hydrology, water temperatures, and weather. So the process we go through is a hydraulic design where we look at the critical hydraulic constraints on the project, the structures, and how that changes over time or over the hydrograph, so higher or lower. We do a combination of you ramp up the modeling to 3D, but 3D modeling requires a lot of data, so you have to take those into consideration. So the area, you can see we're looking up canyon. Phase 4 down below was the Saco diversion, which is an active diversion. Phase 1 is the pilot project, which is right in the middle of Helper. And if you haven't stopped there on your way through, there's a beach, and the kids love it. It's a great central point for the community. Phase 2 is called the Janet Street. Phase 3 is North Main. Phase 5 was just completed upstream off of Martin Road, and Phase 6 is at Gelati Pond. And I'll click through and show you some of these. So this is the Phase 1 pilot project. This was a vertical bank that was just miscellaneous vehicle parts and rock and concrete and things like that. I talked to the contractor, and he said he thinks someone bulldozed a house into this area. So just because it's not in good shape now doesn't mean you can't have a great space for people. And the kids love this in the summertime, so it's a good spot to be. It's right behind the Balance Rock Cafe. And that was another aspect, is, getting a lot of the local businesses involved. So it's been really helpful. So let me see. The next one was Phase 2, Janet Street site. You can see on the left, there's vertical railroad iron that is spiked in vertically, and then a lot of times they put tires and things like that behind it and sticks to keep this up. This was actually a obsolete irrigation diversion. The irrigation was all consolidated upstream. You can see on the right side of the left photo, there's a Bronco in there, and the one negative comment we got on any of the projects was that they used to like to fish off of that Bronco. But on the right, you can see post-construction. We did a large rock grade control structure, and it drops down with 3 drops instead of 1. And this provides, passage and longitudinal connectivity. Phase 3, on the left, you can see, again, there were about 30 railroad lines spiked in vertically and a bunch of tires and other rails laid in there. And then on the right, you can see that we actually created some steps down to here, and there's a recreation feature. And then there's actually fish passage in there as well. You can compare the to the right. There's a line that shows the part of the railroad, and that was one of the significant site constraints. Phase 4 was the active diversion at a Sacos are the family that diverts water to grow alfalfa, and this was basically Jersey rails or K rails, those concrete blocks that were just thrown in to the river, and and it created definitely a fish passage issue between 5 and 6 feet of vertical. On the right, after post-construction, this is a different view, but you can see we put in 5 drops, and each of those drops is about a foot each. So there's swim pathways through there. And then there's a bench on the side. So now you can get through here. People can also continue down from above. This is phase 5, which we recently completed. What you can see is there's rail lines that were used to stack boulders, and then a rail line that went right across the river and created this grade control. We found out when we were in there that they put water lines under here, and the construction guys were told that there was at least one water line, and then once they started digging, the landowner came out and said, "Oh no, what we meant was there's 3 water lines and we have no idea where they are." So they had to be real careful, but we left that wall in place because we didn't want a $500,000 project fixing that wall. But you can see now this is all backwatered. Phase 5 after shows it's backwatered, and then we've got some of the neighbors heard about it. These folks live downstream, and right as soon as we got the equipment out of the stream, they came in. And this was the first run of phase 5, and they went right back to their house downstream about 2 miles. Their only complaint was they wished it was 5 miles. So we opened up that recreational access to the river, and now you can go upstream and go right down through the middle of town, and it's a great amenity for folks, and these guys must have been watching because they were the first to come down through. So you can see we put 3 separate drops in order to compensate for about a 4-foot head loss through here. So people are enjoying it. This is our phase 6 project, in which you can see it's about a 12-foot vertical drop, and we plan to reinitiate the connectivity here. There's a few other diversions downstream between the Green River and the Price River that are going to that are also going to be worked on in the future, and it's possible Colorado pike minnow could come up here someday. So we're working with the Fish Passage Program. So you can see in this that there's definitely a hydraulic issue here. The fish cannot swim up. So we modeled a couple different scenarios. This one is 13 different small drops. This one is 5 ramps, steep roughened ramps to allow the fish to have resting areas. And so that's our next challenge, is getting in, and we're developing the funds for this right now. In 2019, the Division of Wildlife Resources sampled the area and found lots of different fish. They found mountain and bluehead suckers throughout the reach. They had previously surveyed it, and there were bluehead suckers below some of these diversions in the pools, but then at a certain point, they could no longer get upstream anymore. So we've reconnected the habitat. They also released Colorado River cutthroat into the river, and a friend of mine actually purchased a house down here, and he fishes right out of his back door. So it's been great for the community, and that's been one of the big aspects. And there was a lot of discussion in last week on the benefits of getting the communities involved, and we've actually got the middle school kids and a lot of folks, and it's been great for the community. It's been great for the resources, and one more to go, and then we'll go up and downstream. So that's all I have for today, and I look forward to taking folks' comments and talking to you in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. It's a pretty impressive project with 6 different phases. So before I get into the Q&A, if anyone is still having issues with Zoom, you can try to get out of the meeting and get back in. That may help, but feel free to just ask any questions verbally if you are still having issues. So Eric, we do have a couple questions that have come in. Great project. Are you doing any vegetation restoration for habitat and bank stabilization?
We are. Each of the phases of the project has a riparian revegetation component. We get in there, we fix the river, and then that creates some floodplain areas behind the rock structure. So we go back in and we do sedges and willows and rushes and things like that. And then we've actually, as part of the whole project, we went up to the very top and started taking out Russian olives and moved downstream with the Utah Conservation Corps. And to the point that the trees, we only left the trees that were too big to mess with the hand crews. And then we replaced those areas with a variety of, salt tolerant and kind of desert shrubs, Ruse trilobata and willows and woods rose and things like that. So yeah, that's a big part of it. And then there's another question about working with private landowners. Many of these sites are partially on private lands, and we usually just get a letter of agreement from the landowners. And it's a challenge at some points in time, but as the project has built that momentum, folks are much more okay with it. So yeah, we just get letters of permission from the landowners, and for the most part, we've had good compliance with that.
Great. Has the river contoured differently after these restorations?
Yes, yep. The river contours differently. It's really channelized in the side of the valley compared to where it used to be. But we get different deposition patterns. They used to have just one big plunge pool, and then all that downward energy was creating that deep scour pool. Now that's separated out into multiple steps, and then that creates little floodplains to the sides. Overall, the river is still, constrained by railroad and road and infrastructure and bridges. So the river's not really in a different place, but it does function differently at each of these locations. And, there's fish swimming pathways through, and as you saw, people can boat down now through the area.
Great. I have a question for you about monitoring, pre and post monitoring, and what you guys are doing there.
So we came in with Mark Coles-Ritchie and Arthur Morris helped me with some riparian survey points. I don't think Mark's on this today, but we did some riparian inventories. We mapped the area, we mapped the Russian olives and other things like that prior. We put in some small point intercept transects, kind of like green line surveys, and a little bit of that. And then we'll go back. We have gone back and surveyed the surviving vegetation, mostly for establishment purposes and adaptive implementation. But we do plan to go back. We've also got the Natural History Museum of Utah has helped us bring some school students to come out and set up some monitoring points with iNaturalist. We've got some bird monitoring that USU out of Price is doing. And then there's community surveys and things like that. But we do want to go back in and do some more riparian surveys after we're done and as we're cleaning up. But we don't have funding for that currently, but we try to make sure to have at least a little bit of monitoring funding in each of these. A lot of it's tied to our wetland and stream permits.
Great. Yeah, you have some great examples of community involvement. When, like you said, if you don't have funding all the time for monitoring, how can you get the community involved? So,
yeah, and just to follow on that, we're actually working on a citizen science monitoring protocol for all of Utah, and on some of these specific projects. So maybe we'll present on that next time.
Yeah, that would be great. One more question: is Helper City the long-term land manager?
Yes, Helper City is, Helper City works with Carbon County, flood control on, the river corridor. Some of the land is private, so we had to basically get commitment from the private landowners that they would steward the lands. But yes, Helper is responsible for the long term. And we've started a Facebook site. It's called the River Helpers. And people get out and water cottonwoods and, other things like that. So it's really community based because Helper doesn't have a lot of capacity, but they did hire a guy to come out and water the plants and for the 2 or 3 year establishment period. So yep, they're into it for the long term.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions in case anyone wants to ask one verbally? Okay. All right, Eric, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's great.
Okay, our last presentation is from Haley Stratton and Tamara Keefe with Felsberg, Holt, and Ulveg. Their presentation title is Goats as a Method of Weed Control in St. Vrain State Park.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tamara Keefe, and Haley Stratton and I will be presenting on the Colorado Department of Transportation's North I-25 EIS mitigation site at St. Vrain State Park. The purpose of the 2011 CDOT North I-25 EIS project was to identify and evaluate multimodal transportation improvements between the Fort Collins-Wellington area to Denver. The project was estimated to have an anticipated total of 16.10 acres of permanent impacts to waters of the U.S. The Corps permitted the project under a 404 individual permit in May 2013. The intent of the mitigation plan was to reestablish floodplain wetlands and native riparian habitat to mitigate for the impacts associated with the proposed 35-year build-out of the North I-25 EIS preferred alternative. The mitigation site is located at the St. Vrain State Park in the town of Firestone in Weld County, northwest of the intersection of I-25 and State Highway 119. Mitigation was constructed up front prior to impacts occurring. The total of 23.9 acres of proposed enhancement were credited at a 4-to-1 ratio to equate to 5.98 acres of wetland mitigation credit. Combined with the 6 acres of proposed wetland creation credited at 1-to-1, the proposed mitigation areas were expected to yield a total of 11.98 acres of wetland mitigation credit. The mitigation sites involve 2 parcels of land within the project area, which are all managed by CPW, but one of the parcels is owned by the State Land Board. An interagency agreement between CDOT, CPW, and the State Land Board was put together for the purpose of having all parties fulfill the wetland mitigation commitments and requirements of the North I-25 EIS and the North I-25 Section 404 individual permit. The agreement set up a timeline for the construction, maintenance, and long-term management of the wetland mitigation site. The plan was to begin work in the fall of 2013. However, it was delayed until spring 2014 because of the September 2013 flood. The flood deposited sediment, washed away vegetation, and caused erosion along the Idaho Creek and the St. Vrain. The mitigation plans that were put together consisted of planned construction prior to the 2013 floods. Due to the amount of change the flooding caused to the area, plans were field-fitted during construction. At Area 1, the St. Vrain Terrace site, 8 acres of enhancement included preserving existing wetlands and converting existing disturbed agricultural land to riparian shrubland, forest, and grassland habitat. And 6 acres of creation restoration was done, which included lowering the current surface ground elevation to be at or near groundwater level. At Area 2, the Idaho Creek site, the 15.98 acres of enhancement also included preserving existing wetlands and converting existing disturbed agricultural land to riparian shrubland, forest, and grassland habitat. The project was partially accepted pending a 2-year landscape maintenance period, which was completed in the spring of 2016. Some plants did not survive and were replaced under the landscape maintenance agreement. Additionally, shrubs were adversely affected by unauthorized mowing in 2016. 2016 is considered the first annual monitoring period due to the significant replanting effort to get the project into compliance with the conditions of the 404 permit. In 2017, the wetland areas appeared to be progressing towards meeting performance standards. However, the upland areas were generally showing more non-native and weed infestations. During the GPS survey in 2016 for as-built totals, it was determined there was a surplus of 1.42 acres of mitigation credits. However, due to the timing of the survey early in the site establishment, the as-built totals were revisited in 2018 as the sites matured. The 2018 GPS survey found that the St. Vrain Terrace site had a surplus of enhancement completed, which provided an additional 0.32 acres of mitigation. However, there was a decrease in the amount of enhancement completed at Idaho Creek and resulted in a shortage of 2.05 acres of mitigation. With a small surplus of 0.32 acres of mitigation at the St. Vrain Terrace site, there was a total shortage of 1.73 acres of mitigation, which equals 6.92 acres of additional acres to be enhanced at the 4-to-1 ratio. On February 12, 2019, a brainstorming session was held at CDOT to gather ideas on an adaptive management strategy to complete the enhancement needed. Each restoration site was discussed to determine what options were available for maintenance, enhancement, and/or creation. After the internal meeting with CDOT, an adaptive management plan was created for both sites. Once the plan was finalized, we met with St. Vrain Park Management and U.S. Army Corps to present the plan for approval. CDOT was able to secure additional funding to complete the adaptive management beginning in 2020. In January 2020, mapping of vegetation types throughout Idaho Creek was completed to document areas of existing wetlands, riparian areas, and upland floodplains in order to get a better idea of areas that could be enhanced. Also, neither the Idaho Creek site or the St. Vrain site has met the standard for having no more than 20% non-native species. Therefore, weed management is necessary in order for the sites to meet the standard in the future. The adaptive management for the St. Vrain Terrace and the Idaho Creek sites can be divided into two primary actions, maintenance and corrective.
An integrated weed management plan was drafted in April 2020, and a comprehensive non-native and noxious weed survey was completed on June 30th of 2020 at both sites. We also flew our drone over both sites, once prior to weed management, during weed management, and then once after weed management. This was all to obtain aerial information for base mapping and videography. Maintenance actions included using goats and then a follow-up herbicide treatment. So here we have a map of the St. Vrain Terrace site showing the results of the weed survey. So the most dominant species at this site were Canada thistle, common mullein, musk thistle, hoary cress, perennial pepperweed, and downy brome. Other observed weed species were field bindweed, common teasel, moth mullein, Russian knapweed, diffuse knapweed, Russian olive, and tamarisk. At the time of this June 2020 survey, there was approximately 7 acres of weeds throughout the 20-acre site, so about 35% of the site was covered in weeds. Another weed survey at the St. Vrain Terrace site will be completed summer 2021 to determine if weed coverage is decreasing or if the weed management plan needs to be adjusted in any way. So the dominant weed species at the Idaho Creek site included Canada thistle, perennial pepperweed, musk thistle, hoary cress, and downy brome. Other observed weed species included field bindweed, diffuse knapweed, and Russian olive. At the time of the June 2020 survey, there were approximately 8 acres of weeds throughout the 17-acre site, making about 47% weed coverage. Another weed survey will also be completed at the Idaho Creek site in the summer of 2021, again just to determine if the weed coverage is decreasing or if the weed management plan needs to be adjusted. Goats were brought to both of the mitigation sites in order to reduce size, density, and reproductive efficiency of the non-native and noxious weed populations. CDOT used goats from a local company called Mutton Mowers to graze each site. There was a total of 33 goats and 2 llamas, and they were at the sites for 52 days starting on July 13th of 2020. The goats were divided between the mitigation sites in order to work both locations simultaneously. Each site also had a llama to protect all the goats from any potential predators. Solar-powered electric fences were used to divide the sites into smaller pastures, so these pastures were grazed one at a time for an average of about 4 days. In these maps, you can see the pasture lines, and the first number is the pasture number. The second number after the dash is the amount of days that the goats remained in that pasture. The green layer is observed and recorded weeds from the 2020 weed survey. As far as preferences go, the goats definitely like alfalfa, curly duck, prickly lettuce, sweet clover, tree leaves, cattails even, and they would eat the Canada thistle. The goats did not, however, consume the milkweed, rushes, or sedges in any measurable quantities. So luckily, the goats have totally been a hit with park visitors, as well as the park staff. They've been really receptive to us sticking some goats into the park as their resident weed whackers. While the goats worked each site, they accomplished a large amount of weed mitigation, soil disturbance, fertilization, and vegetation stimulation. Since this was our first year, improvements could be made for future grazing. The timing of the start of the grazing was approximately 3 to 4 weeks late. Most of our targeted species had actually already flowered and gone to seed, but the goats did strip the leaves and at least prevent a second flower. Following a significant amount of precipitation, thistle rosette started growing in much higher densities at both sites. So it was determined that the best course of action would be to complete a fall herbicide treatment for thistle species and perennial pepperweed at both sites. Milestone was used to treat up to 10 acres at each mitigation site. And these sites were very densely populated with thistle, so given the extent of the weed coverage, it's likely additional weed management will be necessary this year in 2021. When comparing costs between these two methods of weed management, between herbicides and goats, the goats do end up being more expensive on a cost per acre basis. However, on this project, CDOT just thought it was more important to try another form of weed control that's less harmful to the environment while supporting a small local business. CDOT also recognized the opportunity in this project to conduct a study and definitely considered that. The option of comparing herbicide treatment at one site to goat treatment at the other site. However, unfortunately, there were just too many variables between the two sites that couldn't be controlled for, so that wasn't done.
In order for the corrective actions to be successful, it was decided that additional data needed to be collected at the Idaho Creek site. Therefore, the site was surveyed to determine the existing vegetation communities throughout the entire site. Soil samples were gathered to determine the best plants for the soil type, and water monitoring wells were also installed to obtain groundwater data. The planned enhancement at the Idaho Creek site includes 1.52 acres of enhanced existing wetlands, 3.14 acres of enhanced riparian area, and 2.28 acres of enhanced upland floodplain, which totals 6.94 acres of enhancement, which offsets the mitigation shortage. Water monitoring wells were installed within the Idaho Creek mitigation site to obtain additional groundwater data for plantings. There was a total of 8 wells installed throughout the mitigation site, and recordings were taken between April 1st, 2020 until August 29th, 2020. The data helped to determine the best locations for plantings, as well as the species of plants based on the preferred water regime of each species. Exact placement of plants was determined in the field during installation. Zone 1 is located in areas where groundwater is more consistently present, therefore wetland herbaceous species were planted in this zone. Willow species were planted in Zone 2, and Zone 3 contained riparian trees and shrubs. 10 four-wing saltbush plants were also experimentally transplanted from the berm to areas within the enhanced upland floodplain. If these plants are successful, additional transplants may be done for other areas. In order for the plantings to have a better chance of success, the containerized willows and cottonwoods were deep planted, approximately 4 inches deeper than the tops of their containers. An old roadbed in the enhanced upland floodplain area was also decompacted and roughened to a depth of 12 inches using a mini excavator. Amended with 500 pounds per acre of biosol, broadcast seeded with a combination of the CPW St. Vrain Park upland seed mix at 80% and riparian mix at 20%, and mulched with wood straw at approximately a 50% coverage. The 2020 Annual Mitigation Monitoring Report concluded that all but one of the performance standards have been met. We need to be below 20% of non-native species. CDOT has scheduled mutton mowers to come back in the spring before any flowering has occurred. Once the goats have grazed during the spring and summer, we'll follow up with an herbicide treatment in the fall. The weeds have been increasing each year, and in 2020 they were a big issue. The 2020 report marks the 5th formal monitoring report for the mitigation work. The individual permit requires 7 years of monitoring unless the site meets all conditions. We are confident that we are on track to meet the permit conditions by the 7th year, if not sooner. Thank you all for listening to our presentation, and please reach out if you have any questions or would like to learn more.
Okay. Thank you, Haley and Tamara. We do have quite a few questions coming in, so I will go ahead and read the first one. Was the reduced amount of wetland created due to hydrology and water dispersal being less than planned?
Hi. Yeah, actually, it was. Due to that, especially from the flooding, it deposited a lot of additional sediment in the area. And so when they went in to try and fix everything, when they installed it, the area was a lot different. And that's why we also installed some groundwater monitoring wells to figure out exactly where the groundwater was now. But that was the major reason. The plants didn't grow where we thought they would grow based on from the 2013 floods.
Thank you. This next one is 3 parts, so I'll just read one at a time. Did the goats only treat one season?
They did. That was the first year. We are planning on having them out again this year, but they'll be starting earlier, so they'll be starting in May rather than July. So we're hoping it will be a much more successful year.
That kind of just leads into the next one. Would you have been more successful with multiple treatments, which is generally required?
Yes, and so we were planning on doing this season, and then if necessary, probably next season. And then we would continue to do the follow-up herbicide treatment because that seems to be the best results if we do goats and then follow up with an herbicide treatment.
Great. And did they eat the perennial pepperweed and bindweed?
They did. They did. They pretty much ate most of the weeds out there. The only thing they really didn't was the cheatgrass, the downy brome. I think, by the time they were out there too, it was pretty dry and probably not very edible, but that was the only one that they really, really didn't do anything to.
Okay. Do you have a treatment monitoring report you could share on the goats and herbicides?
We do, and actually, I will have to just double check and make sure that I can share that, but we do have a report.
Great, and we can connect people with that as well after today or later on. So, did the goats eat the white top?
Yep, they did.
And let's see, we have Eric chimed in, the goats will eat the perennial pepperweed, but since it is rhizomatous, it will require some follow-up with herbicide. I've found that both goats and herbicides are needed in most cases to deal with a variety of species.
Yeah, and that's also what we found, is that the goats were great, but to really make an impact, the follow-up herbicide treatment in the fall is necessary.
Great. Do you think the goat droppings had a positive effect on the new plants?
Well, I think it's a natural fertilizer, right? And so I think, yeah, it probably did have a positive effect on the new plants.
Okay. What do you think the relationship is to recovery and soil health benefits from goats versus herbicide? I wonder if over time, the soil health boosted by the goats versus treatment with chemicals seems to be something to consider.
I mean, the goats also, as they're walking around, they till the soil, and then they also have their droppings and everything. So it's not just, a weed treatment, but they also, and so that's why we wanted to go ahead and try using the goats to see what beneficial impacts that would have, rather than just using herbicide as the only treatment that we would do.
Did FHU design the restoration plan / plant list? What firm is performing the post-restoration vegetation monitoring?
So CDOT was the ones that designed the restoration, and then they're the original ones that did the plant list and everything. After they've had some trouble with the success of that, they enlisted FHU and then a couple of other firms to help out with determining the best plantings to be put in there and the placement and that. And so FHU right now is doing the post-restoration vegetation monitoring. So we were doing that every year for the Corps, and then we're just helping CDOT with the plantings and figuring out the best way to move forward.
Great, thank you. A few other comments in the chat box if anyone wants to read through there. It looks like Eric provided some additional information on white top, which can cause an iodine deficiency, and supplements are needed. So with that, I want to thank you both for your time today and great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. We do have a little bit of time left, so we are going to do a breakout room / networking question. Let me share my screen here. So before we jump into that, I just want to thank all of the presenters again for your presentations today. And a few quick reminders. If this is your last day for the conference, if you could fill out the conference eval. And then tomorrow we will start at 10 o'clock, and our first session is tools, technology, and monitoring. So how this is going to work, we'll launch the breakout rooms. You should be put in there automatically. If you're not, put in the chat box that you need to go into a room, and we will get you there. The question is, what is the biggest issue challenge that you or your organization is working on? So we hope you can connect face-to-face with some of the conference attendees and gain something out of this networking session.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Excuse me. I'm doing pretty well. Yeah. I'm enjoying a little snow lately. It's been nice.
I wish we would. It's been really nice here in Grand Junction. I really can't complain too much.
Yeah. Sunny and warm.
Warm enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's warm enough here too in Durango. For sure. The snow is melting. We got a bunch of snow 2 weekends ago, but we were out of town, so we missed it.
Oh yeah, you're in Durango, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we got it good too. Hopefully it keeps coming.
Yeah, let's hope. Sometimes March can be pretty wet, so that would be good. Yeah, you guys had big fires last summer, huh? Nearby.
Yeah, it's I mean, just like everywhere, you know, it's like just what it is at this point. I came from Arizona, so
yeah,
it's just always.
Yep, big fires there too.
But yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Kai is here. He stepped away. I could start. My name is John Leary. I'm a restoration coordinator with RiversEdge West. I have been here since for about a year, just over a year and a half. I started June of 2019. I don't know. It's kind of a cop-out, I guess, but you know, the biggest issue that we deal with is tamarisk and Russian olive, and riparian vegetation issues. You know, I'm kind of stumped on what we face as an organization as a whole, because I found it really interesting that even, you know, someone who has my same exact, you know, position and title, our jobs and where we work and where we are in terms of partnership development are just completely different. So it's really interesting, but you know, it's really hard to say that there is a broad common issue.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's all I got for now.
That's fine. No worries. Yeah. Well, since I teach at a college, I don't know if that I don't know if that question really applies so much. Working on rivers, those are the kind of questions that come up. Like, what's the hydrology? Like, what the biggest challenges for river systems are water or lack thereof, and then invasive species. So.
And I
think sorry. I think to your point about having different like job looks, even with the same job title, goes to the place-based focus of the work that we're doing, and how our work is really based on what community we're working in at this point. You know, like both the ecological community, and also the human communities. I work on the Verde River, and just even across our watershed is very different types of communities throughout the watershed, and different types of work have to happen for different ones. So it's interesting.
And have you been on the Verde for a while?
Yeah. I just did the map 2017, so 4 years in the Verde. So I started as a Forest Service seasonal on Fossil Creek. If you watch my presentation, I got to just talk about how all the restoration we've done there, and I've transitioned from you know, wilderness tech to field supervisor and now program coordinator. So I've kind of seen it from different angles, and interesting. It's a good area and a really important river, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's awesome. I used to live in Flagstaff, so the Verde River was always a special place, I thought.
Definitely, yeah.
yeah, I was like doing the seasonal thing, moving around to just gonna live places for 6 months, and then it was my first Forest Service seasonal position, and I've been here 4 years. So
You got sucked in.
Yeah, I did.
Welcome back, everyone. That concludes our day 3 of our conference. For those of you who are still sticking around, thank you. Join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we will see you then. Have a good rest of your day.